The king's cruel gift asterisk. The throne hall was cold and vast, carved from black obsidian and echoing with mockery that didn't need sound to sting. The alien king sat lazily on his crystal throne, dressed in deep blue royal robes that shimmered under the twin suns, his expression carved in stone as he looked down at the lone human soldier standing before him. "You ask for peace," the king said, his voice like gravel grinding against metal. "Then take her." He waved a hand dismissively, and the guards brought her forward. She limped, slow and silent, her metal leg dragging across the polished floor, her head lowered, face hidden beneath her silver hair. One horn broken, her arm withered, useless from the shoulder down. "Take my daughter," the king said again, laughing this time. "She's useless to me, too broken for war, too soft for rule. Maybe a pet for a human is all she's good for now." The court laughed, the nobles grinned, and even the guards smirked. But the human didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't sneer back. His name was Captain Darius Voss, a veteran of Earth's burned wars and now ambassador to the galactic crown, chosen not for diplomacy, but for surviving everything that should have killed him. He stepped forward, gently reached for the alien girl's hand, and she flinched, her eyes barely visible, violet and trembling. "We're leaving," he said quietly, as if this was just a matter of fact, and with no regard for the king's game. He guided her out without another word. In the shuttle, silence ruled. But he didn't push her to speak. She sat curled against the wall, her eyes avoiding his, the metal leg clanking with each movement, the scent of machine oil and pain filling the air like cold smoke. She hadn't spoken once on the way to the ship, hadn't looked at him even when he gave her food, water, or a warm blanket. Only when the stars stretched before them did she whisper her name, barely loud enough to be heard. Alara. It was the first time he saw her truly, her face hidden under that silver mess of hair, her cheek scarred from an old blast wound. But her eyes held a galaxy of shame, rage, and something else. "Do you want to go back?" he asked calmly, not out of insult but choice. She shook her head. They traveled to an old Earth colony on the edge of neutral space, a place forgotten by war but alive with life, where no one cared about broken limbs or old names. He gave her a room, quiet and clean, and she stayed inside for days. But he didn't leave. He worked nearby, doing repairs, helping local farmers, and sometimes leaving small gifts outside her door, a drawing tablet, a flower from Earth, a music file from his world. One night he found her outside, trying to fix her metal leg, wires sparking, fingers trembling, her jaw clenched in frustration. Without asking, he knelt beside her and passed the right tool. His hand steady, his voice calm. "Here like this," he said. She didn't thank him, but she didn't push him away either. Over time she spoke more, not often, not easily, but enough to share that her leg was never upgraded since the injury, that her father never saw her fight again after her defeat, that her people called her the Hollow One. She asked him why he didn't leave her behind like everyone else. Darius looked at her and simply said, "Because I see someone who's still standing." One morning, she came to him with her damaged arm held forward. "Fix this too," she said, teeth gritted, eyes narrowed not in anger but in effort. Together, they rewired nerves, rebuilt motors, and slowly her grip returned, shaky but present. She trained every day, using her other arm, her new grip, her steel leg to strike balance, punch harder, move faster. Villagers watched her change, whispers turning into awe as she lifted fallen machines, carried stone slabs, and taught herself to move like a warrior. Again, she sparred with Darius in open fields, her sweat mixing with sand and sparks, her voice no longer a whisper but a command. And then, one day, an envoy arrived from the galactic court, sneering and smiling with cruel intent. "We've heard rumors," he said, "that the Hollow One walks again." And with a human by her side, Darius stepped between them, his hand near his sidearm, voice steady. "She's not yours anymore," he said. The envoy laughed and left, But the message was clear. Alara had become more than a discarded daughter. She had become a threat to the king's image. That night, Alara stood beside Darius, looking at the stars with her rebuilt limbs shining under moonlight. "I'm not the hollow one anymore," she said. "I'm whole in a way they'll never understand." He smiled. Not out of pride, but quiet agreement. She had not only risen, she had remade herself. Stronger, sharper, still scarred, but not broken. And this time, when war came again, it would not be Alara who begged for peace, but the king who feared her return. The Hollow One awakens. Darius woke early before the twin suns rose. But Alara was already gone from the shelter. He found her in the far field, striking a wooden post again and again, her metal leg digging into the dirt, her repaired arm slicing through the air with sharp movements. She did not notice him at first. Lost in the rhythm, lost in the war song her body sang without a voice. When she finally stopped, she was breathing hard, shoulders rising and falling, steam lifting from her skin in the morning chill. Darius didn't speak, he simply nodded. Once, and Alara gave the smallest nod in return. That moment needed no words. Later that day, a small group of locals approached the shelter, curious but careful. One of them, a mechanic named Burrow, pointed to Alara and whispered, "Is that really the Hollow One?" Darius looked at Alara, who stood tall in the doorway, covered in dust and sweat, her eyes glowing cold and sharp. "She's not hollow," Darius replied. "She's reforging." Alara said nothing, but she had heard him. That night, while Darius repaired a water pump, she sat beside him for the first time. Silent at first, then asked quietly, "Why do you believe in me?" Darius didn't look up from the machine, just answered, "Because you never stopped moving forward." The next few weeks were different. Alara no longer hid in her room, no longer flinched when someone looked at her leg or her scars. She walked through the town square, helped lift crates, repaired solar panels, and joined Darius on patrol through the forest edge. One evening, a young alien boy ran to Alara, holding out a broken toy drone, his eyes wide with hope. She knelt and took the drone gently, then fixed it with her one good hand and a careful smile. The boy didn't run away. He hugged her metal leg and whispered, "Thank you, warrior." That word hit her harder than any insult her father had ever thrown. Not hollow one, not broken one, not useless. He called her warrior. Later that night, she sat alone under the stars, replaying the word over and over. In her mind, Darius found her sitting there with her old armor laid out before her, pieces rusted and useless. He sat beside her and asked, "Planning to throw it away?" She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "I'm going to rebuild it." They worked on the armor by firelight, adding earth tech into its broken joints, replacing old metal with new carbon weave, balancing its weight with magnets and shock supports. It wasn't just armor now, it was a symbol. Each piece they fixed became a piece of her old self reclaimed, reshaped, no longer a reminder of failure, but a sign of survival. By the end of the week, Alara stood before the mirror, fully armored in silver and black. One horn still cracked, one arm scarred, and eyes burning like twin novas. Darius stepped back and said, "Now the galaxy should be afraid." A scout ship arrived that night, unmarked, silent, slithering through the sky like a shadow. Darius spotted it from the ridge and woke Alara immediately. She didn't hesitate, suit on, weapon loaded, eyes ready. The ship landed outside the town limits, and a squad of soldiers disembarked, royal crest burned into their shoulder plates. At their lead stood General Koth, the king's hound, and the very warrior who crippled Alara years ago. His voice echoed across the field as villagers gathered. Behind Alara, the king sends regards to his pet human, he said, grinning, and demands the return of his property. Darius placed himself beside Alara, one hand on his rifle, the other raised calmly. "She's not your property," he said. "She's not going anywhere with you." Koth stepped forward, eyes narrowing at Alara. Still standing, Hollow One? I expected you to rust in silence. Alara didn't flinch. She stepped forward too, her voice firm and cold. Try me, coward. With a roar, the soldiers rushed in. But Alara moved first, her metal leg launching her forward like a comet. She struck the first soldier with her elbow, spun, kicked the next into the dirt, and deflected a blade with her rebuilt arm. Darius fired at their flank, clean and sharp, covering her movements while villagers scrambled to safety. Alara's armor hissed and sparked as she took hit after hit, but refused to fall. She faced Koth at last, their blades clashing in the open field under the moons. He laughed at first, mocking her strength, taunting her every movement, but then she began to win. Strike by strike. She wore him down, her footwork precise, her breathing steady, her eyes filled with rage and focus. With a final slash, she broke Koth's weapon, then drove her knee into his chest and slammed him to the ground. He lay there, gasping, bleeding, his smugness shattered. Alara looked down at him and said nothing, then turned her back and walked away. Darius lowered his rifle and watched her walk, not broken, not limping, but tall and complete. The villagers stood in stunned silence. Then cheers erupted across the field. Children shouted her name, adults bowed their heads, and the wind carried one word through the night like a prayer: warrior. The king demands his monster back. The message came at dawn, carried not by ship, but by sound. A voice echoed from the sky, deep and thunderous, spoken in royal dialect that made the air itself tremble. I am King Valzek of the Iron Star. It said, and I demand the return of my daughter, my disgrace, my property. The villagers froze as the message played across the valley, repeated every hour, a challenge wrapped in command. Alara stood on the edge of the field, hands clenched, armor scarred from the last battle, her breath steady as a mountain. Darius stood beside her, not speaking, just waiting. The voice continued through the day, growing louder each time, until even the crops bent under its weight. Some villagers began to whisper that it was time to give her up, to end the threat before war came to their quiet homes. Alara heard their voices but didn't blame them. She knew fear better than most, and she understood that not everyone wanted to bleed for someone else's name. But that night, she climbed onto the old stone platform and faced the crowd. I was given away like garbage, she said, her voice sharp, but I was never trash. I rebuilt myself. With these hands, with this leg, with your help, and with his faith. She pointed toward Darius. If he wants me back, she said louder, then he can come here and take me himself. A silence followed, and then someone clapped, and another, until the whole village raised their voices in support. Darius didn't speak, but when Alara stepped down, he handed her a datapad. It was a map, one that showed a hidden route into the Iron Palace itself. You're not running, he said, but maybe it's time you choose where this ends. Alara stared at the map, then at him. You'd come with me? Darius smiled faintly. You'd go without me? They spent the next 3 days preparing in secret. The villagers supplied what they could fuel. Old star charts, power cells, a camo cloaking shield salvaged from the last skirmish. Alara and Darius rebuilt her old fighter, a hybrid of alien, steel and human tech, a beast with claws and wings reborn. On the 4th morning, they left before the sun rose, flying low beneath the scanners, the engines humming like whispers. Alara flew with precision, her eyes never leaving the path, her fingers steady on the controls. Darius watched her from the co-pilot seat, remembering the girl who had once flinched at every touch, now guiding them through the stars with steel and purpose. They reached the outer rim of the royal sector just as the alarm net activated. The palace loomed in the distance, carved into a dying star, wrapped in fire and gravity walls. It was not built for beauty, but fear, a fortress no one approached unless summoned. But they had not come to ask. They descended through the firestorms with cloaking on, slipping through the cracks like a blade through silk. Inside, they moved fast, armor sealed, weapons charged, hearts silent but sensed. They bypassed patrols, climbed molten corridors, dodged heat sensors, and followed the pulse of the throne itself. At last, they reached the inner chamber, and the doors hissed open to reveal him. King Valzek sat on a throne of blades, his cloak woven from war banners of conquered planets, his eyes glowing like dying suns. He looked up slowly as if already bored by the interruption. "You came crawling." "Back," he said, voice thick with false triumph. "As I knew you would." Alara didn't kneel, didn't lower her gaze. She stepped forward and tossed a piece of broken armor at his feet. "Not crawling," she said, walking. The king's guard stepped forward, but Darius raised his rifle instantly, aim steady. Valzek held up a hand, halting them, eyes now locked on Darius. "Human," he said with disgust. "What spell did you cast on her to make her forget her place?" Darius didn't answer. He didn't need to. Alara did, her voice low but cutting. "He didn't cast anything, Father. He listened when you silenced me. He helped when you broke me. And he stayed when you gave me away." Valzek stood, slow and tall, towering in his ancient armor, each step echoing like thunder. "You are of royal blood," he said coldly. "You were born to rule, not to crawl with insects." "I was born to fight," Alara said, "but you made me feel like less than dirt now. I fight for me." She drew her blade new, sharp, forged with human steel and alien heat, and pointed it at his chest. "You called me hollow," she said, "but you are the one who is empty inside." The king bared his teeth, rage finally cracking his cold face. The duel began in silence, no words, only motion. Blades clashed, steel screamed, fire danced between them as father fought. Daughter, past fought future. Darius watched but didn't interfere. This was her battle, her choice, her war. Alara moved like lightning, her scars no longer her weakness but the source of her strength. She dodged, countered, struck, and bled, but never fell. Valzek roared, striking down with both hands. But she caught his blade and threw him off balance. With a final cry, she disarmed him and drove her blade into the ground at his feet, not into his heart. He fell backward onto his throne. Gasping, beaten not by force, but by her will, Alara turned her back to him and walked away. Darius joined her as alarms rang and guards stared, too stunned to move. No one stopped them as they walked through the palace halls, silent like ghosts but heavy like legends. The Hollow One had returned not to beg, but to prove she had never been hollow at all. The warrior who walked away asterisk. The palace gates opened behind them, but Alara didn't look back. The throne, once her father's pride, now echoed hollow with silence and failure. She had left him alive not as mercy, but as a reminder that power, built on cruelty, crumbles when the beaten rise. The sky outside was filled with smoke and orange clouds, but their path was clear. Darius walked beside her without a word, his weapon lowered, his eyes steady. They had entered the lion's den and walked back out with fire in their wake. News of what she had done spread faster than any fleet could travel. By the time they reached orbit, Alara's face appeared on every pirate signal, every neutral newsfeed, every rebel wall across the galaxy. Not as the Hollow One, but as the warrior who walked away. She had faced the king and refused to kill. She had won without becoming like him. That made her more dangerous than any blade. Back at the colony, the villagers were waiting, standing in quiet rows as the ship landed. No cheers this time. No celebration, just silent respect as Alara stepped down in her armor, her helmet tucked under her arm. A little girl walked up, holding a flower made of scrap metal and wires. "For you," she said. "You're not scary anymore." Alara knelt and took the flower with both hands, her eyes soft for the first time in weeks. Darius watched from behind, leaning against the landing gear, arms crossed but smiling slightly. He saw the change in her. She no longer walked like a wounded soldier or a discarded heir. she walked. Like someone who had nothing to prove but everything to build. The days passed, and she began to train others. Young villagers came to her asking how to fight, how to stand, how to build strength from pain. She never taught them to kill, only to survive, to protect, to rise again when pushed down. She called it the Iron Circle, and every night more joined. They fought with sticks and metal rods, learned balance on broken ground, and spoke about things no one else dared to name. Fear, shame, rage, and how to master them. Darius taught too, but from the edges, helping reinforce the shelters, fixing weapons, adjusting shields. He let her lead, and she let him stay. One evening, as they repaired the damaged cloak field together, Alara looked up and said, "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Darius glanced sideways. "Not this exactly. But I knew you wouldn't stay broken." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Why didn't you ever ask me to stay with you?" He paused, hand still over the circuit box, then said, "Because it had to be your choice." That night, she left a token outside his door, a single plate from her old armor, marked with her family crest and her own sigil burned through. Its silent answer, not of thanks, but of belonging. Across the galaxy, war stirred again. Other alien clans began to question Valzek's rule, wondering if the Hollow One could rise. What did that say about the king who cast her out? Factions that had once bowed now watched the stars nervously, waiting to see what Alara would do next. But she didn't declare war. She didn't send messages or threats or demands. Instead, she built. She turned the colony into a haven one that accepted the broken, the lost, the ones left behind. Scars became badges, weakness became lesson. And the stories they told were not of conquest, but of survival. Valzek remained silent, licking wounds in the shadows of his fractured court. He had not expected to lose without death, and the shame cut deeper than a blade. His generals urged retaliation, but his own soldiers hesitated. Now when her name was spoken, one day, a strange ship arrived painted black, its signal cloaked, its origin unknown. Alara met it outside the shield wall, sword on her back, head high. A single figure exited, tall, hooded, and missing a hand. "Are you the one who walked away from the throne?" he asked. Alara nodded once. The figure removed his hood, revealing a branded face, one of the king's exiled sons. "I was cast out too," he said, "but I see now why. I don't want a crown, only a cause. Let me fight with you." She didn't answer right away, but she offered her hand. He took it without hesitation, and so they came exiles. Deserters, former slaves, warriors turned healers. Alara never asked where they came from, only what they were ready to build. Each brought stories of suffering, and she gave them a forge for rebirth. One day, during a storm, she stood in the field watching lightning tear across the sky. Urias joined her, his jacket soaked, his expression calm as always. "Do you regret not killing him?" he asked. Alara's voice was low, but clear. No, letting him live was the punishment. Darius nodded slowly. "Then what now?" She looked out at the fields, where children trained under pouring rain and elders watched from shelter roofs. "Now," she said, "we become what he feared most, a world he can't control." And as thunder cracked overhead, she stood, like a statue of fire and steel, no longer needing a throne, for her people had already crowned her in silence. Asterisk. The rise of her own name. Asterisk. The forge burned day and night now, glowing like a heartbeat in the center of the colony. Alara worked beside the blacksmith, not above him, shaping tools and armor for others, not just herself. People didn't salute her. They nodded, worked with her, listened to her, and trusted her without needing orders. Her name was no longer spoken with pity or warning. Now it was said with weight, like a promise. Alara, the one who rose. The iron circle had grown too big for the old square, so they cleared new ground and built a training yard under the open sky. There, she taught not just moves, but meaning, how to fight without becoming the monster, How to win without forgetting who you are. Even off-worlders started arriving, some with cybernetic limbs, some with scales or horns, each carrying scars that no one mocked here. Alara welcomed them all, so long as they came with honest hands. Darius spent most of his days rebuilding the outer shields, expanding solar nets, and quietly writing reports he never sent. One evening, Alara asked why he hadn't contacted Earth Command since they returned from the palace. He looked at her and said, "Because they would come take credit for what you did." The answer didn't shock her. She knew now that some victories were not for governments, they were for people who had nothing else left. This place had become a home not by accident, but by effort. Word came that the king had placed a bounty on her head, 50,000 credits, dead or captured, with her crest posted in every mercenary port. It didn't scare her. It made her laugh for the first time in weeks. Now he's truly afraid. She said, "Not of what I'll do, but what I've already done." And still, she didn't run or hide. She sat on the same bench every evening, cleaned her armor in full view, and shared her food with those who sat beside her. Darius sometimes joined her, though neither of them said much. One day, a bounty hunter came alone, confident, wearing a face mask of bone and carrying twin blades. He reached the center of the colony before anyone stopped him. Alara met him herself, barehanded, eyes calm. "You came for the reward?" she asked. He looked at her, then at the children watching nearby, then back to her. "I came," he said, "but I won't stay." He dropped his weapons and walked away. By sunset, he had joined the wall repair crew, working silently beside the others. That night, Darius said softly, "You're winning the war without firing a shot." Alara looked at the stars and replied, "Because this time, the war isn't out there, it's in here." News finally reached her that the Iron Star Throne was crumbling. Factions were breaking apart, generals defecting, and the king had locked himself inside the central spire. Trusting no one, they begged her to take the crown, to return and rule what had fallen apart. But she refused. "I don't want to sit on a mountain of ash," she told them. "I want to build a place where no one is thrown away again." Instead, she sent one message back to the galaxy. "I am not coming to take power. I am staying where people found purpose." The message went viral across the stars. Rebels quoted her. Colonies painted murals of her. Exiled captains wore her symbol on their jackets, not as royalty, but as a reminder. Alara's name had risen beyond bloodline, beyond family, beyond title. It had become its own force. One quiet evening, as the wind moved gently through the towers of the rebuilt colony, Darius found her sitting alone. She held the scrap metal flower the little girl had once given her, now wrapped in cloth and wire for preservation. "You ever think about what comes after?" she asked him. He sat beside her, leaned back against the wall, and replied, "I think you're already living it." She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the silence she had earned. Then she said, "I think I'm ready to give something back, not just fight, but plant something that lasts." He looked at her, and for once, he smiled fully. Then maybe this world needs a new name, not a colony anymore, but a beginning. They chose the name together, Vareya, an old word from both their languages meaning from ruin, reborn. It spread across the galaxy faster than the king's decrees ever had. And in that name, people came, not to worship, not to follow, but to join. From a broken princess came a living legend, not carved in gold, but written in soil, sweat, and unshakable hope. The storm before peace asterisk. The peace didn't last forever. Nothing ever does. The Iron Star cracked open from within as desperate generals scrambled for power, and from its ashes rose a final threat. One of Valzek's oldest warlords, General Izar, declared himself ruler and vowed to burn Vareya to the ground. Unlike Valzek, Izar had no patience for thrones or words, only fire. He sent a fleet of 60 warships toward Vareya, their engines dark, their signals silent. Cloaked in hunger, The colony's warning systems lit up red as the first wave crossed into nearby space. Darius was the first to respond, rallying every engineer, every fighter, every soul willing to defend their new home. Alara didn't panic. She stood before the iron circle with her blade in hand and said only one thing. No one runs, this place is ours. They had no armies, no grand weapons, only grit and unity. But what they did have was knowledge. Scouts had mapped the valleys. Engineers had laced the hills with electric mines. And every villager knew how to fight back. When the sky darkened with incoming ships, Varaya stood ready. Children were moved underground, the wounded sheltered, and every hand took up a tool, weapon, or shield. Alara stood on the outer wall as the enemy landed, smoke hissing from their claws and drop pods crashing into soil. Izar himself stepped from the lead vessel, taller than most, armor blackened, face covered by a skull mask. "You are no queen," he shouted. "You are a ghost pretending to matter." Alara stepped forward, raised her voice without fear, and said, "Then come and try to erase me." The battle began without warning. Explosions rocked the cliffs. Soldiers stormed the wall, but the defenders held. Darius led squads through underground tunnels, striking from behind like shadows with steel teeth. Alara moved like lightning, her rebuilt armor absorbing blasts, her sword cleaving through metal and flame. She fought not like a monarch, but like a sister protecting her family. Every time someone fell, another rose to take their place. Even those who once feared battle now stood tall beside the iron circle, swinging pipes, throwing shields, screaming their names into the storm. The fight lasted a full day and bled into a second night, but the colony refused to break. Izar met Alara in the field, just like her father once did. He wielded a warhammer that glowed with plasma, striking the ground with rage. But Alara didn't flinch. She faced him with both hands on her blade and her people behind her. The duel was brutal. Every swing cracked stone. Every step left scorched earth. But Alara fought with something more than fury. She fought with purpose. Izar screamed and charged, thinking brute force would finish her. But she ducked, turned, and struck low, slicing wires in his suit, then slammed her armored fist into his chest. He stumbled back but didn't fall. Instead, he laughed and said, "You're stronger than your father." She said nothing, but the second strike shattered his hammer, and the third sent him crashing to the ground. He looked up, face revealed under the broken mask, scared, defeated, trembling not from pain, but from the truth. "You don't have to kill me," he begged. Alara raised her sword, then lowered it slowly. "I'm not him," she said, and with that, she turned her back and walked away. Darius appeared moments later, wounded but alive, helping others carry the fallen. She ran to him and grabbed his shoulder, making sure he was still standing, still breathing. He said with a grin, "But you stole the show again." By morning, Izar's fleet had retreated. His own men refused to follow a warlord who had been beaten by the very one he called weak. The stars cleared, and for the first time in decades, no shadow loomed over their world. Varaya stood, damaged but proud, a fire that no wind could put out. Alara walked through the ruins, helping lift debris, checking the wounded, hugging the children who thought she was made of stone. No one chanted her name. No one bowed because they didn't need to. She had become more than title, more than legend. She had become home. Later that week, she and Darius stood at the top of the rebuilt tower, looking over the fields where seedlings now grew again. "I think we won," he said softly. Alara nodded slowly. "Not by force," she replied, "but by refusing to break." She handed him something, her old crest, reshaped into a pendant. "You were the first to believe I wasn't hollow," she said. "Now, I want you to carry that belief with you." Darius took it, not as a gift, but as an honor. Then he leaned in, forehead to forehead. The warrior's way of sharing truth. They stood there until the sun rose behind them. casting golden light across the broken land now healing again. And far beyond, across the stars, others watched, listened, and remembered, not the story of a king's daughter, but the story of the girl he threw away, and the human who helped her rise. Together, they had turned a mockery into meaning, and a weakness into a world worth fighting for. The galaxy had crowned warlords, tyrants, and emperors. But now it would remember a name that stood for something stronger, Alara.